One teenager admits to taking part in a gruesome murder, landing him in jail for the rest of his life. Now his lawyers are saying that his confession was coerced. It's the linchpin in Brendan Dassey's controversial case. Tonight, my Nightline co-anchor Dan Harris investigates.
Come on, Brendan, be honest. You can do it. Just tell us the truth.
I grabbed her arm, put it on the side, and tied her up.
Are we looking at a killer reluctantly unspooling the details of his crime?
And then we brought her outside and shot her.
Why don't you draw where the bloodstains would have been?
Or are we looking at a confused, intellectually challenged teenager being manipulated into falsely confessing? The case of Brendan Dassey has leapt into the national consciousness as a result of the Netflix documentary series Making a Murderer.
They got to my head.
This controversial confession tape was the centerpiece of Dassey's trial. He's been in prison now for nearly 10 years, convicted of raping and murdering Teresa Halbach. But he and his family have maintained his innocence.
They interrogated him and made him say what they wanted to hear.
Dassey now has a new legal team, and they've filed a new federal appeal based in large measure on the argument that Dassey's confession was coerced. So we went out to explore these questions. If Dassey didn't commit the crime, why would he confess? And if this videotape really shows Dassey falsely confessing, what made the jury convict? First stop,
we're going to Laura's office.
Laura Nyrider, one of Dassey's lead attorneys and fiercest defenders.
Come on, buddy. Let's get this out, okay?
What you have here are police officers who are using psychological interrogation tactics that were designed for seasoned adult criminals on a 16-year-old with intellectual limitations.
The interrogators aren't banging the table, they're not threatening him. Does it fit into the sort of classic model of coercive interrogations?
Absolutely, it does.
At the time of his arrest, Brendan Dassey was a high school sophomore in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. He had a low IQ and was enrolled in several special ed classes. He lived on the family salvage yard right next to his uncle Stephen, who'd been released from prison after serving 18 years for a rape he didn't commit.
I'm glad you're home, honey.
But then Avery was arrested and charged with the murder of Teresa Halbach.
Why don't you just have a seat, Brendan?
Several months later, Brendan was brought in for questioning.
Caught her
Cut her where?
on the throat.
It appeared hard to be able to argue that it was coerced.
Len Kaczynski was one of Dassey's original court-appointed attorneys. He says when he watched the confession tape, he became convinced there was no way a jury would believe Dassey was innocent. Kaczynski did try to get Dassey's confession thrown out.
The defendant's motion to suppress these statements is denied.
What are your thoughts after today?
Well, we're disappointed in, we're start over.
So Kaczynski steered Dassey to cut a plea deal. He even set up another interview with his client and the police.
You and Steve had this planned? Yeah? Yes or no?
Yeah.
An interview Kaczynski actually skipped because he says he had Army Reserve duty.
How on earth could you opt out of that?
With 20/20 hindsight, yeah, it was a mistake.
For his failure to attend that meeting,
Okay, why'd you sign that?
the judge removed Kaczynski from Dassey's case.
Do you have a clear conscience?
Yes, I do. I did what I thought was in Dassey's best interest. I don't think, though, those mistakes had any impact at all on the verdict in Dassey's case.
Several months later, Dassey went to trial with different attorneys, and his confession dominated the proceedings.
Your job at the end of this case will decide whether that statement ought to be believed.
When you watch the videos carefully, they'll be exposed for what they are. And I think they're just garbage.
Dassey himself took the stand.
You made it up.
Yeah.
Sticking to his story even under tough cross-examination.
And you lied to the police.
Yes.
Are you lying? You're lying today?
No.
The prosecutor at Dassey's trial made this confident assertion.
People who are innocent don't confess. The defendant confessed because he was guilty, because he did it.
But the fact is, innocent people do confess. Richard Offshee is one of the leading defense experts on interrogation tactics. He worked on the infamous case of the Central Park Five.
I grab one arm.
So I kept grabbing my arm and grabbed her legs and stuff.
5 teenagers who confessed in gruesome detail to attacking and raping a 28-year-old woman in the spring of 1989.
Every time she was told, he was smacking. He said, shut up. He kept smacking.
But these confessions were all false.
They came to believe that they would only be able to minimize their punishment if they cooperated with the police.
Turns out 1 out of 4 people wrongfully convicted and later exonerated by DNA evidence have made a false confession or incriminating statement.
So when you look at Brendan Dassey's confession, what do you see?
I see something that almost makes one ashamed to be an American. It's that bad. They get him to say anything that they want him to say.
I don't feel that if I was faced by cops accusing me of a crime I did not commit, that I would confess to it.
What would you do?
I would say get me a lawyer.
And that's the difference. Those are the people I never see. The ones I see tend to think, I got to get myself out of this. And probably your income is a bit higher than the average person.
If she can get her client a new trial, Laura Nyrider hopes to demonstrate how she says the interrogators railroaded Dassey.
We just need to hear the whole story from you.
They reduce him over time to a place where he doesn't think that he can convince these officers of his innocence. And when he's at that position of hopelessness, then the officers offer him a way out.
Your mom said you'd be honest with us. And she's behind you 100% no matter what happens here. That's what she said. Because she thinks you know more too. We're in your corner.
And what you see is Brendan begin to believe the officers and think, okay, I have to say these things that they want me to say.
Even when Dassey breaks down and confesses, Nyrider says, by her analysis, he offers up no information that was not already widely reported in the media.
The 25-year-old photographer disappeared last Halloween.
He was last seen taking pictures at the Avery salvage yard.
Or directly fed to him by investigators.
All right, I'm just going to come up and ask you, who shot her in the head?
He did.
Why didn't you tell us that?
So I couldn't think of it.
Any fair reading of that sequence is that Brendan is guessing in an attempt to placate his interrogators.
We reached out to the detectives in this video for comment, but our efforts were not successful. Even now that I understand that false confessions are a real problem in our justice system, when it comes to the case of Brendan Dassey, there are still so many open questions. If he didn't do it, is it just a total coincidence that he was at a bonfire that night with his uncle, and in that bonfire they found the remains of a murder victim?
Look, what happened that night is exactly what Brendan has said all along. The family had bonfires all the time to burn their garbage. Same thing with cleaning up the garage with his uncle. Again, this was an auto salvage yard. People were constantly tinkering around with cars and having to clean up after the fact.
Even though 2 lower courts have already denied his appeal, Brendan Dassey sits in prison tonight, holding out hope that a federal judge will answer his prayers.
I wish I could have a family someday.
Toward the end of Making a Murderer, he can be heard reading a letter with an emotional plea.
I am innocent of the rape and murder of Teresa Halbach. Please help me if you can. Sincerely, Brendan Dassey.
So do you think Brendan Dassey's confession was coerced? Head to the Nightline Facebook page to weigh in.